Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Welcome to BrisScience for another month. Thank you so much for coming along this evening. Tonight we have a very special event, which we'll get into in a moment. But first of all, if this is your first BrisScience, as always, thank you and a big welcome for coming along. Tonight, a couple of things that BrisScience does a little bit differently. First of all, tonight we have a couple of speakers, so we're going to have some presentations and then some Q&A. To do that Q&A, you would have received on your way in a piece of paper, BrisScience question slip paper. And so during the talk, write down your questions, or during the question time afterwards, and Leonie or some of the others will come around and collect those questions, and we will get through as many of those as we can at the end. We also take questions over Twitter. So your phone, which is of course currently set to silent, you can use the hashtag BrisScience, and you can either tweet as you go or tweet at the end, and we will take questions from there as well. I don't think that... And of course, at the end of tonight's talk, we will have some refreshments, and both of our speakers will be available to sign autographs or answer any questions that you might have. So without further ado, let's get started. And welcome to BrisScience for May 2016. Tonight, our event is brought to you, of course, by the University of Queensland and hosted here at the fantastic Edge in Brisbane. And I'm your host for this evening, Joel Gilmore. Tonight, we've got a unique event bringing together a scientist and a sports person to talk about concussions. We're going to be discussing what really goes on inside your brain if you experience a concussion and what that means for your future health. And then we're going to hear from a former rugby union player about what it's actually like when the risk of concussion is part of your job. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker for this evening, who's Dr Fatima Nasrallah, who's a neuroscientist specialising in brain imaging at the Queensland Brain Institute at the University of Queensland. Dr Nasrallah researches how head injury affects brain function, including the risk of fast-forwarding the onset of dementia. Her dream is to develop an early diagnostic test for concussion. And so we're very lucky to have her with us tonight. So could you please welcome our first speaker, Dr Fatima Nasrallah.
Good evening, everybody. Very nice to have you here, and I'm very pleased to actually be able to be part of this. Today I'm going to be talking about a topic which is actually probably something very, very common to everybody. And you know, at some point in time you must have heard of it, or you've known somebody who's had a concussion, or somebody who, or a friend who has actually been exposed to a concussion. And so that's basically what I'm going to be talking about today. So what does concussion really mean, and how do we define what concussion is? Now, we watch sports videos, and I'm going to take you through this, which I have sort of, got off YouTube, and and actually when you actually look at it, you get this feeling that, wow, what is this? And when you Google it, it's like hardest, meanest, and toughest. This is what really comes up. But actually, when you're looking at it, it's basically, we go through the thrill, we think about what's happening, we watch it, and we have fun, but we never think of what the consequences behind that are. And this is something that's very common in sports, whether it's, rugby, whether it's hockey, whether it's basketball, any type of sports that we might be playing. And so, while you do watch these scenes, what do you really think is happening in the background? You get these massive knocks, and these players come off the field and think, oh, I'm okay in a couple of minutes or an hour, and then it goes back to square one again, and they go back on the field. So, what are we really looking at, or what are we really experiencing when this actually happens? And so that's been part of what I've been interested in looking at. So what are the consequences of this? So there was this recent movie that I saw on Thai Vickery, whereby there's the ball is sort of around here, if you can see it, and he's right over here. And he's suffered multiple concussions through his career. And what you can see a concussion has done to him is that it's 20 meters away, but he thinks that the ball's right on top of him. So he starts getting these sort of, imaginations of sports and imaginations. So he really, these are sort of the consequences that you might get if you do have severe concussions or multiple concussions over time. So I'm sort of just, displayed those to sort of give you an idea of, this is a reality, It might be in sports, but it can happen every day. It can happen with old people falling, multiple falls. It can happen in car accidents whereby you get head injuries. Concussion is sort of the very mild end of the spectrum, whereby you get a knock to the head. And and you sort of think, does it really have a consequence because the symptoms are just not there? So I want you to imagine that. So I'm more going to go into the details about what might be happening behind, so what's happening in the brain at the time of a concussion. And I want you to imagine the brain as a sort of, so it's a very jelly-like substance. So if you imagine a metal encasement or a box, and you imagine so much fluid inside, and you have like a balloon full of water. And so when this metal case moves around, that balloon inside is going to move around and hit onto the sides of the metal on the outside. So even if I do protect that metal from the outside, when I move my head back and forth, or when I have this acceleration, deceleration from a concussion, that brain inside, although it's in that liquid, is going to hit to the sides. And so that's what I really mean about concussion. It's not the outside injuries that you might see. So actually it's been, and I have to mention this one because it's sort of been on the hype at the moment with the new movie that's come out on concussion. And basically what this movie talks about, it's actually done by Will Smith, but it's based actually on a true story, and it comes from NFL players in the States. So what they discovered, or the actual scientist that discovered that, his name is Bennet Omalu. And he's a forensic pathologist who actually looks into NFL players. And one day he had Mike Webster, who was one of the famous NFL players, died at the age of 45, had very bad symptoms of hallucinations, had very bad symptoms of psycho problems, psychosis, all different types of issues that, you would probably get if you had very severe dementia, so sort of like dementia-like symptoms. And so what he showed is that when they had taken Mike Webster, when he was still alive, for CT scans, they showed that there was nothing wrong with him. So he would get all these symptoms of dizziness, memory loss, hallucinations, but nothing on the CT scans would show up. And so when he died and they actually took autopsies from the brain, they could see that his brain was actually looked like an Alzheimer's disease brain. So if we look here, this is a normal brain. I'm going to show you that these white bits here are sort of the fibers that connect the brain together, and on the outside over here you have all the cells which do all the function. It's called the grey matter. So this is the grey matter and this is the white matter. And you can see in a normal brain it's quite full. All the gyri, or the sides of the brain are sort of full, and the brain's full. And when you come to an Alzheimer's disease brain, you can see that it really shrinks. It shrinks because we start losing that grey matter. We start losing those portions of the brain. And that's how we sort of define an Alzheimer's disease brain. Now, when he took the brains from Mike Webster and other people that had played in the NFL, they showed that first they had dementia-like symptoms like Alzheimer's disease patients, but they also showed when they did the autopsies is that the brains were shrinked like an Alzheimer's disease brain. The only difference is that these people, or these players, had Alzheimer's disease much earlier on, or dementia-like symptoms much earlier on. So if you do get dementia or Alzheimer's, we know that you don't get it probably before 65 because that's how the pathology progresses. But these, were healthy players, and you expect that when they're healthy players that actually, that would prolong, because they've done exercise, they've done training, that would actually prolong the length of, how old they are, or when they would die. And so basically this is what's really led to the hype about, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is what they called it, because it looks like an Alzheimer's disease brain, but the pathology is quite different. And so this is basically the reasoning behind it. So if we go back to the analogy about the brain, when I talk about the brain and I talked about the grey matter, you can see that this is your grey matter over here, this is the skull on the outside, and this is the liquid on the in-between. And so you can see that if the liquid sort of surrounds all that area of the brain in an attempt to protect the brain. So if you do have a concussion, we're sort of in evolution that we have the CSF surrounding the whole brain area, so that when the brain does hit to the sides of the skull, you're actually protected. But to what extent can that fluid really protect the brain? So if we look deeper into the sort of inside of the brain, so this is sort of on the topical outside, but if we go into the tissue, if we go deep at the basic structure of the brain and we look at the cells, these are neurons which are actually, firing away in a very balanced manner when your brain is acting in a very balanced situation. So, you're healthy, you're normal, and they fire. So these are the cell bodies. And then all cells in the brain are connected via axons or fibers, which, help them engage and communicate with each other. So as they fire normally and they're connected normally, then they sort of, are responsible for healthy brain function. And this is what you normally get in a healthy brain. Now, when you've had a concussion, now we're going to play this. This is a movie that I actually took off, but I thought it was a very nice way to illustrate when you have a concussion, what really happens in the background. So if you've had a concussion, basically this is the skull, this is the brain, and you've actually if you move forwards, the brain's going to move in the opposite direction and hit the back of your skull. If you move backwards, it's going to hit the front. Now that's in a very sort of slow motion, but if we move very fast, the actual impact is much, much higher, as you can see. And so what's happening is that when the brain is hitting the skull, it's sort of bruising, and we call this a contusion. Now, depending on where the hit is, the contusion happens. And so if we move into the very deep parts of the cells, so what's happening at the really basic level of the brain, what's really being affected when we actually have this contusion, it actually really comes down to the cellular level. So how are these neurons or how are these cells in the brain interacting, communicating with each other to be able to take care of healthy function? So what happens is that these cells get affected and the connections between them start falling apart. When they stop talking to each other, they lose their nutrients, and that's when they start dying off. As one cell dies, the second one dies, and they start releasing chemicals that sort of kill the rest of neurons. And that's how sort of a contusion or a brain injury sort of develops and kills existing, nearby neurons and so. So basically this is what when we talk about concussion or we talk about contusion, this is what we're really actually sort of imagining in our brains in the background. This is what's really happening. Now, you might all know that, different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. So, your visual cortex, which is the occipital right lobe here, right in the back, is responsible for vision. Your frontal area is responsible for memory and executive function. So different parts of the brain actually take care of the different tasks that you need to do in daily lives and so. So you have, different lobes that are responsible for that. And so based on where you actually get that knock or where you actually get that hit in the brain is what really defines the severity of your symptoms. If you get slurred speech, then obviously you've had a problem in the speech areas in the brain. If you get blurred vision, for example, it's areas that are related to the visual system. So what are the symptoms of concussions, and what do you expect if you've had a concussion? Now that really depends on the severity of the concussion that you've had. So you might get physical symptoms, so you might get a headache, you might get nausea. Different parts of the brain, depending on where they're affected, would be able to be responsible for the different symptoms that you see. You might get blurred vision, as I mentioned, dizziness, ringing in the ears, which is responsible for auditory function. So there's different types of symptoms, and they vary depending on the severity of that injury. You might get emotional symptoms. For example, you might get depression, you might get disorientation, confusion. All these symptoms depend on where in the brain you're being affected and the severity of that impact that you get. And that's why we see mostly in sports, but also maybe in falls, that you get a large variation in the symptoms that you see. And the worst part of it is when you get, for example, loss of consciousness, because that really defines how bad the symptoms are and how bad the consequences may be. Because when you've had loss of consciousness, you have loss of oxygen to the area of the brain. And so this is where you sort of need to seek sort of, more medical assistance to be able to, reassure you that the concussion or the knock that you've had or the bump to the head that you've had is not as bad, or how long it would take to heal, because the brain actually takes time to heal after a specific concussion. And so what is current practice for concussion? What do we actually, what is on there at the moment to define what concussion is, diagnose what it is, and actually do something about it if you've had a concussion? Now, in sports, for example, which is the main one, you'd probably get, a set of questionnaire whereby this is the SCAT, so it's the most common one, whereby it's Sports Concussion Assessment Tool. And they ask you questions. So if you're on the field and you've had a concussion, they ask you a series of questions like, how dizzy, are you dizzy? Have you been vomiting? How are you feeling? Are you sad? Are you, how do you sleep? So these sort of subjective questions that are really subjective, and how much they really reflect what's happening at the level of the brain is actually something that we don't know. We really don't know, how much they reflect what's happening on the at that level. And so what the common practice has been is that, if you're in doubt, just sit them out. So they get them to sit outside because the only way to heal from a concussion is time. The brain needs time to heal from a concussion. Depending on how severe the concussion is how much time it needs to heal. And so one of the main problems is the severity of the concussion, and the fact that we don't know how long it takes for the brain to heal. We can't see. Most of the time the symptoms that the person has on the field does not reflect what's happening at the level of the brain. And I can say that from studies that I've done previously, where we've done MRI scans that show that the brain is still in the process of healing, but the symptoms are just, they're not there. They've just gone after 3 or 4 hours. So it is something really important to be aware of. I mean, I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't play sports. I'm not trying to say, because it can happen on a daily life. I have a 2-year-old son who falls every day, and I'm always, horrified as, oh my God, what's happening to his brain every time he thuds to the ground. But so it's sort of it's something we can't prevent, but I think something that we should be aware of, and try and take the most safety measures possible to be able to see, to see that through. So now, if you were to lose consciousness on the field, or from a specific fall, and you go to the hospital, they would actually do a CT scan, which is a very fast scan. It's a bit invasive because it involves radiation and so. But in 5 minutes you get an image of your brain. Now, the downside of a CT is first the radiation, and the second thing is that it doesn't have too much contrast. So you can see that the brain that I showed previously, where you had grey matter on the sides and the white matter, the contrast is really bad. But if you've come in with a concussion, and if you're a basketball player or if you're a sports player, you might have had multiple concussions previously. So, at least on a CT, you'd be able, if it's a really bad contusion that's been there for some time, you'd be able to see some changes. This is a basketball player who actually had a concussion on the field, so he fell and he hit his brain, his head. So in 4 hours' time, he was dizzy and he was sort of confused with a bit of memory loss, but after 4 hours, he was fine. And then 12 hours later, he started vomiting and getting slurred speech, so he's taken and got the CT, and they could see a small contusion here. Now, from the initial assessment after 4 hours, they sort of said, oh, your symptoms are okay, so you could just go off and play again. But, after seeing this, the fact was that, you have to get another CT and wait until your brain heals. And when the CT sort of is normal, then you can go back and play. So this is what sort of imaging provides, but this is only in severe cases where a CT can show you that. As I said from Mike Webster, his brain was completely normal on a CT, and he had hallucinations, he had different issues. And so, where are the diagnostics and where are the modalities and where are the methods that we are able to detect these changes at a much, finer stage, or at a much earlier stage with much more details that can tell us more information about what's happening? And that's what we actually lack at the moment. So now CT was sort of, available before MRI, and it's been a very helpful technique, especially in cancer. But when we come to magnetic resonance imaging, this is more of a new technique which has blossomed quite well in the past decade. And basically, from MRI, you get much better contrast inside the brain. You can see the grey matter versus the white matter. And if I was to take a traumatic brain injury patient, so this is a patient who's had a very mild traumatic brain injury. So you can see a little bit of change right over here, which is sort of an axonal diffuse injury. If I take a moderate one, you can see even more of that. And if I take a severe TBI, you can see that half this person's brain is sort of, damaged because of the car accident or so. So in a brain injury where the symptoms are there, where you know that it's very severe, you can actually see that on a normal structural scan. I can see very clearly the structural changes. Now, the thing in concussion is that we can't see, because basically the changes are so mild that it's barely seen on a scan. And now there are studies whereby, we're able to look into the brain at all different angles, in all different planes, to be able to say, this is the brain from the outside, look at volumetric changes, look at changes within the brain, and be able to say, what is really happening at these different levels, and, with the fine resolution of this method. So basically, you could take an MRI scan of the brain, and you can actually, with the MRI, when we image, we can actually take specific, with very high detail and resolution, images of every single slice in the brain to be able to try and see whether we can see structural changes. But even on a structural scan, you might not be able to see much. And so this is where sort of functional MRI comes in, because the functional deficits proceed way before actually any structural damage can take place. So if we're able to identify specific methods in function, so this is, for example, the brain, real time while a person's listening to music. And so what you can see is that those red areas there are the areas that are very active while he's listening to music, and then, the music's off, and then it starts to get blue, and, which is less activity. And so by this, we can sort of devise methods to be able to say, functionally, when there's no structural damage, we might be able to pick up mild symptoms or subtle symptoms that we might not be able to pick up with a psychological assessment of a couple of questions. And that is the case even in dementia studies, whereby psychological assessments can't really pick up those subtle changes that you'd see. And so, what we know that concussion is an evolving injury. We know that it has acute but also long-term consequences. And there is evidence out there to show that concussion, or repetitive concussion especially, because when your brain is trying to heal, if you've had another hit to the head while it's trying to heal, you're disrupting that healing process, and that makes it even longer with worse consequences. So, how does, first, what is the effect of a concussion on the brain, and how do we detect that? And second, what are the long-term consequences of this concussion? So there is evidence from the NFL players and from other traumatic brain injury studies that if you've had a traumatic brain injury early on in life or at any point in time in life, you are more exposed to get early onset of dementia much earlier than when you, for example, were supposed to get that, or at a specific age in life. And so this is something that we sort of have to keep in mind. Now, what we don't know is, how do we detect these early signs? So we need to develop methods to be able to detect that. How long do the effects last, and when has the brain healed? So, do we have methods to tell us the brain has healed after 3 days, the brain has healed after 10 days, and then that person is sort of safe to go back and play sports, or, get another hit on the head or so. And what are the effects of repetitive concussion? So if you've had repetitive injury, how much does that affect, that long-term effect on the brain? So these are sort of all questions that we need to think about, and hopefully, I'm hoping that the dream is that we're able to devise methods and developments, and also blood tests. So, you might develop a blood biomarker whereby a person on the field just has a blood test, and you can tell, these markers are really increased. We know that the concussion is going to last this long. So predictive measures. And that's what the research is all about. And, I've joined QBI just recently, 6 months ago, so I'm hoping that this is a field that is we're trying to build up exponentially, because I really have interest in that. And yes, I'd like to thank you very much for paying attention. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you very much, Fatima. And there'll be obviously opportunity to ask questions later. So if you have anything you want to write down on your question slip now, please do. But first, we're going to hear from David Croft, who's a former rugby union player who played for the Queensland Reds, Melbourne Rebels and the Brothers in Brisbane. He took part in the 2003 Rugby World Cup and also won 5 caps representing Australia. He's going to say a few words first, and then we'll open to some questions later. So please welcome Dave Croft.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me tonight. I won't lie to you, I've got no PowerPoint display. I had a baby last Wednesday, so I'm probably terribly prepared. But I was just saying before, I'm probably, if anything, I'm the guinea pig. So I've experienced a lot of what has happened up on that on those slides before, which is quite disturbing, but at the same time something that we're certainly better positioned now to address. So my role tonight is probably to provide a real life, a layman's perspective on concussion. Thank you, Joel, for the introduction. I've played rugby since I was 8 years of age. I played professionally for about 12 years. I was lucky enough to represent my country, and something that I certainly don't regret. Absolutely, when I took on the role of becoming a professional athlete, I understood, I suppose, the risks that came with that, and injuries are part of that. The severity of those injuries is something you just sort of take in your stride and you continue on. I suppose what I have realised post my career is some of the stupid ways I've addressed and maybe treated some of those injuries. And those injuries, everything from your little toe to the big thing upstairs. So I'll probably just touch on a couple of common questions I get asked in these scenarios. And actually, I'm interested to know who here has had a brain trauma or concussion, what they define as concussion. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's 42 million people each year that go through this process, so you're not alone. And it's just not refined or kept in the sphere of sport. It happens on a daily basis. Fatima was talking about her dear 2-year-old. I've got a 2-year-old now, a newborn. And absolutely, I worry on a daily basis when she hits her head that she's gone through this, what her father's gone through. But we all face it, whether it's through car crash, whiplash, there's common occurrence. We all are exposed to this concussion in some shape or form. And people ask what it's like. I'll tell you a story, and I've not fortunate enough, but I have been through this probably a number of times. I have some dear friends that have retired from sport as a result of concussion. I've got some dear friends that are suffering from mood disorders, suicide as a result of, there's links back to obviously traumatic brain injuries. But I'll just take you through one of my examples. I was in 2005, I was playing for the Queensland Reds. I don't know, does anyone know Rugby Union at all? Rugby Union, I played in the forward, so we're supposed to be tough. We're supposed to, we're indestructible. If we get hit, we just get up and we keep going. And that year we were struggling a bit. We went over to Christchurch, New Zealand. We were playing the former champions, the Canterbury Crusaders. I don't know if anyone's heard of them, but they're a wonderful team. They won 7 premierships that decade. So, and this was our chance to restore sort of our season. And the game kicked off, went really well. Afternoon game in Christchurch, it's a lovely stadium. Christchurch has now actually been destroyed, unfortunately, as a result of the earthquake, but wonderful stadium. And about 20 minutes of the game, I received a contact to the head. I don't know what happened. I don't know how it occurred. The only thing I do know is I woke up in the change rooms post-game. Woke up, I was awake the whole time, but I actually came to my senses in the change rooms. And that 60 minutes of football that I played, I had no idea what I did. I had no idea how I played. I'd asked my mate beside me, how did I play today? I had no idea what I went through, which for me was terrifying, was scary. And for me to actually ascertain my performance that day, I had to go back to the video and ask the coach, how did I go? Instinctively, it's actually fascinating. I was talking to Fatima about it before. Instincts take over. When I first I wasn't knocked out, so this is the thing, and they talk about concussion, these mild symptoms that people have to jump on, and I'm so happy the game's advanced to the level it is these days, but it was a mild impact. The doctors come out and addressed me as I spoke to the doctor after the game. He asked the questions which you see up in the SCAP test. He asked those questions. Instinctively, me as a forward, in hindsight being quite moronic, gave him the answers he wanted to hear. I gave him the responses that he as a doctor wanted to hear. Because, and I didn't know what I was saying at the time. I had no idea. I'd asked the doctor what I was saying, or what I said afterwards. And he sort of assessed me and said, look, yeah, he's fine to go on. So for 60 minutes, I played a game of rugby, and I got through, and you know, to wait, to come to afterwards was just a a fairly terrifying experience. But you know, the scary thing is, at the elite level, I'm protected. At the elite level, you know, the NRL and the AFL are really, rugby union's probably not perfect, hasn't got it right yet. And I've been around. I've spoken to the head of the NRL. I've spoken to the AFL. I've spoken to the Australian Rugby Union. I've spoken to the FFA. So, and this is not happening in contact sports. It's happening in a lot of non-contact sports as well. But NRL and AFL are doing it very well at the moment, where they are analysing every second of the game. And if a person is in any way exposed to a head knock, he is taken off the field immediately, assessed accordingly, and basically a decision is made whether to go back on. Now, people may ask, what have I got to do with this? What's my involvement here, and why is this an agenda for me? What scares me is, and what's done is done for me, and to be honest with you, I play the cards that I'm dealt with. But what scares me is how this is getting managed at the community rugby level or the community sport level. The community sport level is what I think, or sport in communities is what communities thrive on, and it doesn't have to be contact sport, and making sure that people on a weekend basis, on a weekday basis, or every weekend are protected when they go in and they play sport. And protected is they are aware of the risks they're putting themselves under. I don't want to change games. I don't want to change rules, because I think it's wrong to change games. It's wrong to change rules. But if we start uncovering some of the wonderful work that ideally will be done in the future on how to properly diagnose, obviously a concussion, how to treat it. So post my Canterbury incident, Christchurch incident, it was basically you monitor throughout the week. You do a few tests and you monitor throughout the week. I was basically tick the box. I was ready to go play the week after. Do we know? No one to this day knows if, and that's the standard protocol still these days is 7 to 10 days. We still don't know if that is the appropriate way to be treating concussion. And the severity of concussion, once again, is hard to diagnose as well. Once that's diagnosed, and once again, 42 million people go through this across the world every year. If we experience this, what is the long-term effects? We still don't know. There's some research out there, but still we haven't landed on it. And how do we treat those long-term issues? So my agenda is not about changing sports. It's actually about building awareness around communities and community sport and people who are faced with this on a daily or a weekly basis. So once again, I'll leave the questions to you guys from the floor. I've got no doubt there'll be plenty. But I thought I'd just give you a bit of an experience of what it's like. And just one other thing. One other agenda I have, and the agenda I have is around the culture, or the I suppose the way the elite sportsman approaches injuries, and especially traumatic brain injuries. As I said at the start, I was a forward. So as a forward, you're supposed to be tough and you get on with things. And the wonderful thing about a brain is you don't need a brain to do a hit-up. You don't need a brain to make a tackle. You don't need a brain to run. But you can do that. You can get away with things. So especially in being a man, you're expected to get up and continue on, and that's seen as courageous. That's stupid. And that's what has to change. That perception, that approach to, I think, concussion and traumatic brain injuries, that has to change, and it has changed over the last 2 years, but there still is a long way to go. And it's courageous to put your hand up and say, I think something's occurred here. It's courageous if you're a mate who's just seen his mate get hit and go up to him and say, mate, you get off the field because you just got your head whacked. So they're my agendas. But please, I open up to the floor and to questions after this. But thank you.
thank you very much. And I'd like to invite Fatima up on stage with David. So if you have questions at this point, post them to Twitter. There's already a few coming through there. Or if you've got your question slips there, you can wave them in the air and we will come round and collect those question slips. Some water there if you want to grab a drink. Just a couple little bits of housekeeping. Of course, as I said, we are hosted here at The Edge today, which is fantastic. If you want to find out some more of the other things that are on here, you can hop on the website. One thing that they do have here is 3D printing, where you can take courses in that, which is a great segue to next month's BrisScience, which is called New Frontiers. And we're going to be looking at new frontiers in 3D printing. And that includes the sort of things you've probably heard about, printing things in industrial context, very large things even, but also human tissue and food. Don't want to get those confused, but we have a panel of speakers, so there will certainly be lots of interesting cutting-edge science there. So come along to that next month. All the details are on our website or our Facebook, which you can sign up to. All right. If you have questions, just wave them around. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Twitter in the first instance while these are coming up. So, first question is from Sir Phil of Kent of Twitter, who asks, do helmets help or do they just make the hits harder?
I mean, I don't think that we're going to lose anything out of wearing helmets. Obviously, from what I've explained in my previous presentation is that, if you imagine what the brain is like, as hard as that encasement is on the outside, when you put a helmet on there, you're just adding an extra encasement, which is probably, protecting you from fractures, protecting you from, external, damage or so. But what's really happening inside? What's really happening to that brain when you get that really massive thud? I don't think that, there are now helmets which actually measure the force and which actually measure the different types of parameters that, tell you how much that impact has been. It really doesn't tell you much about what's happening inside. And so I think they might protect to some extent, but I don't think they can actually prevent the concussion from happening at all, in my opinion.
Have you had any experience, has there been any talk about protection in any of these games?
Yeah, from my knowledge in sport in Australia, NFL obviously you can wear a helmet. Other sports in Australia you can't. You can wear headgear, which all headgear does, which is a soft foam protection outside, will stop cuts. It won't stop concussion. And that's a disclaimer as well that they make. So it's pretty clear and apparent. But once again, I don't think it's preventing.
Yep. Yeah, so in American football, they all wear helmets and heavy padding and everything. Do you know, does that make any difference? Is it just a completely different game?
Obviously, it hasn't made any difference to whatever studies have been there so far. So we know that American footballers do get the most severe symptoms that you might experience. Now, in Australia, it's sort of something that's more and more people have been becoming aware of. But in the States, it's something that's quite common, especially in repetitive injury and elites who've been playing for years and years. And so they all wear helmets, and it hasn't actually lessened. Out of the 80 players, 79 who can actually get chronic traumatic encephalopathy means that, how much these helmets really protecting their brains? Probably not much.
The thing is actually, when you have that protection, the shoulder pads and the helmets, it probably, in a lot of ways, makes it, you feel very much indestructible. So people, and you watch the way they play, they launch head first. It's quite frightening, and it doesn't lessen the impact. And so probably gives them more courage, if anything.
So on the football front, we've got a question, has MRIs been done on whole teams at elite levels over periods of time?
No, so I think that's what the field is really missing, is that there are no studies out there which have prospective studies which have looked at longitudinal assessments of sports people, longitudinal assessments even of traumatic brain injury patients. So it is something that definitely the field needs to be able to get more of an understanding of what's really happening. MRI is capable of non-invasively looking at brain changes longitudinally, and at the time now we have the technology and we have the much more development in terms of MRI. It's not only the clinical scan that you get at a hospital whereby you have a massive contusion in the brain. It's not like that. It's actually changes where your brain look completely normal. But, you know, on functional scans, on more sophisticated scans, we can actually see that there's damage that's done to the brain, and we can monitor that. And these longitudinal assessments are not there. I mean, I've been trying to be able to reach out to sports codes here to be able to get them to participate in studies like this. And, you know, the first impression that I've got so far is that, you know, they really don't want to open it up to parents because they think that'll spook them out. But I think it's something that we need to be aware of because, you know, if you know that, obviously we know that there are, consequences to concussion. And we know that it is there. It's a reality. Now, you know, I think it would be a safer measure if we're able to understand how long it lasts, and we know that, you know, after 3 days, for example, you're able, you know, your brain's completely healed. Now, we might not have the sensitivity enough to see at the basic micro level of a cell, but we'd have other measures as well that complement the MRI that can tell us more information, like blood tests, like psychological batteries and the MRI, which can all be combined to tell us more information. And so, you know, if you can longitudinally assess these subjects, you know, after a concussion, you've had a concussion, come in for a scan tomorrow, and we can see you after a week or so or 2 weeks, you know, it probably would take 1 hour of your time, but I think, you know, in terms of the long run, it gives us more awareness of, or more understanding, because once we understand the mechanisms and once we understand what's happening, we'll sort of be able to devise, you know, interventions. So in cancer, you know, in the beginning, nobody sort of understood what was happening and there were no drugs for it. But now that people sort of understand this is the mechanism behind it, we can devise something to target it. And it's the same thing. It's just that the brain is more of a fragile organ and it's more a complex organ because it sort of runs the whole body, and sort of trying to understand it is a challenge in itself.
It's interesting. It's actually, and in a lot of ways, it's one of the last frontiers as well, because what has been studied in research is all other parts of our body, because they're the things that prevent you from getting on the field. So your knees, your ankles, your feet, whatever it may be, the shoulders. But it's a brain that's been very much ignored, and it's been brought to light obviously recently through a number of sort of high-profile activities, being a movie and obviously a case over in the US. But yeah, it's amazing if you sit back and look at it and you go, wow, you know, it's the most important part of the human body, and it's the last thing to be assessed. So yeah.
So I haven't seen the movie or really, you know, not a lot about it.
Neither have I.
I think it's a very good movie to watch because I think it really puts a true story and a scientific perspective into a story. So anybody can sort of understand what the consequences are. Now, it was a true story. So Bennet Omalu was the person who actually discovered CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And it just comes back from his experience and what he had to face with the NFL codes to be able to actually get that information to the public. So initially they prevented him from publishing any of the work that he found because, you know, they didn't want that to come out, and they were in denial for quite some time themselves, from doctors saying, oh no, there's nothing wrong with them, there's nothing wrong with them. But in the end, you know, it is sort of information. So I think it's a really nice movie to sort of experience, because you do get the scientific, you know, impact of concussion, you know, from an actor like Will Smith, who was just fantastic in the role, I guess.
And that's the issue. And I actually, without seeing the movie, I know the story. I've followed the story for some time. The issue is you've got the behemoth being the NFL, who are trying to, in a lot of ways, bury this information because they saw the impact it's going to have to their game commercially. And the great thing now that, you know, what's happened is they're collaborating and ideally moving forward protecting people, and finding a solution, which is great.
I mean, I think the fact that it's, you know, becoming more of, you know, people are becoming more aware of the fact that, you know, concussion does have consequences. Like there's a new brain band which came up, you know, so, you know, people sort of put it on it. It measures how much force a person is getting from a specific impact. Obviously, it doesn't help tell you what's happening on the brain, but the more impactful the force is, the longer you have to sit outside the field and rest, you know, to allow your brain to heal. So I think it's one step forward towards, you know, better measures of taking care of their players. So I think, you know, we're on the right track, I guess.
Right. Yeah, so we had a question about, you know, measuring in a helmet. Forces. So, you know, is there diagnostic capabilities with that as well? Can you look at where the brain might have been hit, and so what some of the outcomes are, or?
So there are helmets that have been designed, and they sort of tell you, you know, at which side of that helmet the impact has happened. I don't know whether, there are any studies which tell you that, if the hit has happened on the side, that sort of relates to specific symptoms, and if it's happened on another side of your brain, that it's, related to other symptoms. So I don't know how many studies in that sense have happened or have taken place, but... And I don't know how much sort of advantage it would give you just by measuring what those factors, parameters are from the outside, because, in a sense, are they really changing their measures in terms of player safety when they're actually, measuring the parameters from a specific helmet, or what the impact is? If they know that the impact's quite high, what are the measures that they take? Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions about asking more broadly in other sports. Do you have any experience or knowledge about, for instance, boxing, other martial arts type sports? Is it a different type of issue there, or?
I think boxing is another group of subjects or athletes who it's actually very, very common in boxers, and there's lots of evidence in the literature out there about boxers and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's the same thing. I mean, boxers don't want to participate in studies because they don't want to make themselves, publicly known to have had a traumatic injury, or there's pressure from the outside for them not to sort of engage in specific ways to identify that they've had a concussion. It might be pressure from the games. I don't know, maybe you have more information.
No, look, I'm not privy to boxing, what's occurred there. I know in the research, and you've done a lot more research than I have, that obviously the NFL and boxing were the two sports that were closely reviewed. And once again, I don't think we should be changing sports. If people want to box, let them box. Go for your life. Get amongst it. Like, bash your brain out. It's great. But
survival of the fittest.
But it's about understanding. Okay, great. Yep, you suffered a concussion. This is how you treat it. This is how long before you get back into the sport, if you want to get back into it. And this is potentially the long-term consequences of it. And this is how we're going to treat these long-term consequences. So, because this is going to happen. This is a society thing. Like, it's going to happen. We don't want to change. I don't want to change any sports. I think sport's bloody brilliant, but we can put measures in place to make sure we're clearly identifying the nature of the impact, the ways back into sport, and ideally the ways we can treat potentially long-term impacts. So.
And it's interesting to see that it's now that it's more becoming a sort of topical phenomena that. Initially it was only seen in very old football players or retired football players, but at the moment, like the recent event of Justin Clark leaving football, you might have heard of him, whereby he's a 22-year-old who used to play football, and he started getting dizzy after one concussion, after the next, a third concussion. The doctor said, you can't go on the field anymore. And he's a very smart, bright student who did aerontology and worked on airplanes and engineering, and so just from those 3 severe concussions, it's either, you lose your brain or you keep on playing, and, so he had to sort of make a decision at that point of his career that, no, I prefer to have my brain for the rest of my life rather than actually, continue in sports, and who knows what the consequences may be. And from, the track record that he had, they were quite bad. So I think it's quite interesting that we're able to sort of now people are standing up and sort of saying that it's happening at, even at the children's level or the adult level, not only in the retired players which have had, multiple concussions all their life. So it is actually something that's quite common, but probably not everybody's aware of at the moment.
Do you think there is fully informed, for some of those younger players in particular, are they in a position where they really understand those risks? I mean, certainly for professional players. Do you think, is that filtering down?
Look, the last 2 years, as I mentioned before, last year, probably 2.5, 3 years, it's improved dramatically, which is wonderful. But this is once again at the elite level. The community level, what they do is all coaches go through a program, and to get your level 1, level 2, level 3 coaching certificate, you have to be accredited to coach. And what that does is takes people through how to, I suppose in a layman's way, assess, injuries and potentially, concussion and how to deal with that. It's not good enough. Like, I just, and once again, you know, I'm not concerned about the elite level. I'm concerned about the weekend warriors out there who are sort of going around and once again, they can get through and manipulate any systems, but they don't understand the damage they're causing. So the awareness piece is where I think we can have the greatest impact, like an awareness of, okay, I've had an impact, you know, or some sort of brain trauma. Great, I'm taking 3 weeks off, or I'm going through and getting it properly assessed, and just taking your time with it rather than thinking, oh, geez, it's courageous to get up and I see, like I've been involved in, ever since I retired, I've been involved in community rugby, and I see it, like it's bad, it's scary. I go, mate, what are you doing? Like, you're crazy. You know, take 3 weeks off and come back and see me then. So, but you know, it's getting better, but we've still a long way to go. And it starts, you know, once again, it starts with players, like some of the stars really, and Israel Folau was one behind the Samsung headband, and you know, they're all coming out and saying, you know, we need to address this. You know, it's stupid to continue on, it's stupid to carry an injury such as that.
Yeah. So, tough question maybe. Would you let your kids play rugby?
That is a tough question.
No pressure, we are being recorded. So
yes, no.
Your kids will eventually see this.
Yes, I will. And he'll probably see it as well once he gets to a stage where he wants to play rugby. I'm not against him playing rugby. I think I'd sort of be standing out there and sort of, you know, have my heart, you know, hands in my heart and sort of think, oh my God, what's going to happen to him now, and hope he doesn't get a concussion or so. I think it's more about understanding and being, you know, he can be standing outside and sort of fall and hit his head. So I really can't prevent it. I know that people who do play sports are at a higher risk. But I think that there are sort of preventative measures to that. We know that the brain has a very, very high potential and to repair itself and to heal itself. It's an amazing organ, and we don't understand much about it, but it is amazing in a sense that it can repair itself. We see stroke patients who have massive chunks of their brain gone, and you know, they're able with rehabilitative medicine to be able to, you know, heal and sort of, you know, cure over time. And so I don't think that I would prevent him from playing. I think I would like to understand more about, you know, before I get him into the field, I'd like to understand more of what the consequences are, because if I understand, I sort of know, oh, okay, I can reassure myself that he'll be okay. But I just think that, you know, we're at that stage now where it is a bit scary. Nothing to do about it other than sort of, you know, just deal with it as it goes, and just make sure that, you know, you take the proper measures in place as a parent, as a coach person in the club, as those people responsible, that you take the measures. You're aware that there is concussion, you're aware that it has consequences, and you're aware that, you know, you can do something about it if it does happen. You know, like go to the doctor once he's had, you know, a hit on the field. You know, like I know from lots of, in terms of, you know, just the clubs at schools or so, that if they've had a concussion, they sort of sit them aside a bit and they're okay. But, you know, do see a doctor, make sure that everything's okay, and yeah, I think it would be very unfair to prevent them from playing sports just because that this is an incident which would happen to anybody, even outside sports.
Yeah. I'll let my kids run, but once again, you just got to understand and got to look after them. And ideally, when my kids are playing, we'll have these measures in place. Like we'll have this sorted out, and you know, that's my dream, that's my vision, but there's a fair bit of work to be done.
Yeah, so I think a message is that, you know, I think it would be good to engage in research, not because I'm doing research and trying to promote myself, but you know, in terms of any type of disease, without the research we wouldn't understand what's happening, and we can't make advances if we don't understand. And so, you know, we're at a stage in concussion whereby it's not a traumatic brain injury, but it's a mild injury, which is even worse because we can't see it. And, you know, how do we understand what's happening? Unless we actually do the studies and do pilot studies and do, you know, community studies population studies whereby we have that, you know, massive information that allows us to sort of make, you know, sort of interpretations out of it and be able to apply that to the community, which is the whole point, I guess.
I can't believe people don't want to do studies. I jumped at the chance to do an MRI study when I was in uni and got a scan of my brain.
Yes.
I still got my little 3D scan on the computer. It's great. And then all the other physics guys wanted to go down and get one as well, so we probably skewed the demographic of their study massively. I just want to ask a couple of the other sort of quicker questions that we've got here, now that we've sort of done all the heavy stuff there. So in soccer, or football, sorry, heading of the ball is a normal part of the game. Is that the same? Does it cause any issues in the same way, or is it...
You mean the heading part, or is it the concussion part? The heading?
Well, I think it's what does experience show in players, and at what ages should children head the ball?
We don't know.
There was something. Sorry, Kate. There was something recently, and I'd read something recently about there was, I don't know if it was a study or something was found regarding heading the ball, and which was done overseas. I'm not sure of the exact findings, but it was shown to be there was a long-term impact. But which once again it just shows like these mild little cases, and some balls can be kicked harder than others. But so there is something there, which probably where that question was started from. So.
Okay. I've got another question here, and David, you may choose to take the fifth on this if you like. A suggestion that long-term damage related to concussion in sport is accelerated or caused by alcohol and drugs. How true or fair do you think this statement is? I don't know if you have any knowledge about confounding factors or...
that alcohol and drugs play a big impact in... Is that what...
the question is whether, I guess, the injury is exacerbated by drinking after the fact, or is that a confounding risk? Or?
Without a doubt. Any soft tissue injury, any bleeding, with the first thing with any injuries, we're told not to drink. So because once again, it's a toxin, and your body works hard to expel the toxins, and therefore increases and this is it should be over to you because I've got no idea what I'm talking about. But it makes injury bleed more, so causing more damage.
I mean, I think as you get, for example, dementia and Alzheimer's disease, you have a specific predisposition. Some people age healthy all their life, and some people age and get dementia. And you have that sort of predisposition to that, whether it's a genetic predisposition, whether it's an environmental style, or whether it's a specific event that's happened during your life that has actually sort of triggered that, so that you have, moved off the track to dementia versus the healthy aging trajectory. And so I think it's the same with TBI. Some people play all their lives and get repetitive injuries and get multiple injuries, and in the end they're completely fine and they retire and they're fine. And some people do get repetitive injuries at the elite level, and they develop dementia very early in life. And there are factors to that. We know that alcohol affects your brain. We know that stress affects your brain. We know that, drugs affect your brain. And so how all these factors combine together with the injury that's triggered by the impact, how that's sort of just going to mess everything up in the brain, and what it's going to lead to, is definitely more of a consequence than when you don't have that. So it definitely affects, and I think these studies that have come from the States, from the NFL players, are really affected by the fact that these players we know are on steroids, we know they're on drugs, we know they're alcoholics maybe, so they've gone through so much in their life that, has probably exacerbated the effect of what it's led to, in the long term.
All right. We have one final question, which is for David, and apparently this is a question on everybody's lips because Skeptomite, Nicola and more have asked. You said that you played a game for 60 minutes and you had no memory of it, so you really committed. The question is, did you win the game?
No, we lost. So was it worth it? No.
Disappointing there. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please thank our fantastic speakers tonight, Fatima and David, for their time and their real insights. Look forward to seeing you all back next month for 3D printing. Please join us outside soon. Oh, and we have some very small gifts to say thank you from University of Queensland.